Hey everyone, me Kevin here. In this video, I want to share some research with you that makes me concerned about an entire sector of the stock market, but specifically some stocks within that sector that are going to get hurt by this more. Now, I'm going to share this research with you first because it's applicable to all of our lives and many stocks. And then I want to share with you which sector this is concerning for, though I think probably many of you will be able to guess. But then I'm going to break down the specific stocks that are most affected. So you'll definitely want to stay tuned for this breakdown. But first, let's go ahead and start with the research, because this is very important, especially for making money purposes. Speaking of making money, if you like making money, consider checking out the amazing programs linked down below on real estate investing, stock investing, or making money from home with YouTube videos. Okay, let's go ahead and pop on over now to the research. And let me show you this study here from MIT, or this research from MIT, this research question. It's a pretty good one, and I think it's a fair question that many of us have probably thought about. Okay, when should you be tested? MIT Medical gets this question. I've heard a lot about the incubation period for COVID-19, but I'm confused as to how that interacts with testing. For example, if I am exposed or infected on Monday and tested on Tuesday, likely before symptoms show, should I expect that the test would come back positive, or does it take some time? This is a really big question, and it has a lot to do with an entire sector of stocks. So we'll talk about that, but let's get into sort of the research that they've got here. So let's zoom in on this. So the study finds that false negatives, that is you have COVID, but the test says you're negative, found that during the 4 days of an infection prior to you getting symptoms, the probability of a false positive was 100% on day 1 after getting exposed. So you get exposed day 1 after, and 4 days before you have symptoms, you have almost 100% chance of having a negative test despite having COVID. That kind of makes COVID testing not that great. Also, on the 4th day after you're exposed, you have a 67% chance of having a false negative. Also not so great. And then once you actually start showing symptoms on that day, you still have a 38% chance of having a negative COVID test. You could literally go to COVID testing with COVID symptoms, having COVID, and on the day you have symptoms, you still have a 38% chance of having a false negative, which is saying you're negative when you are really positive. So they do acknowledge that a lot of this has to do with the tests that are used, but the incubation period for COVID can be as long as 14 days. So I made this little chart here. So take a look at this. This is the exposure is the X over here. So let's zoom in and say this is when you get exposed. So we'll call that the exposed moment, right? On day 1, you've almost got 100% chance of having a false negative. So you're not going to be able to get tested. With a 67% chance of having a false negative at most testing sites 4 days after exposure, testing is almost worthless. This 57%, that's more than half. That's 2/3 of failure. Now, once you start having symptoms, then 5 days after exposure, there are certain real-time PCR tests, like the ones that MIT uses, that have less than a 5% fail rate or false negative rate. The problem with these is right now, these are not rapid tests. You have to send these in and put the swabs in a little vial, send them off, and it takes like 3 days to get the results. That's not so good, because that means people are waiting 3 days without results, right? So that also has a pitfall. And once you start showing symptoms, let's say you get exposed and you start showing symptoms on, let's say, day 9. Your first day you start showing symptoms was the 9th day after you were exposed. You still have a 38% chance of a false negative. We read that part. But look at this. Even after 3 full days after you get exposed, so look at that, you get exposed on the 9th day, 1, 2, 3 days afterwards, you still have a 20% chance of getting a false negative. AKA, the testings suck right now. This is not very good. What we need is testing, and this is the solution. The solution to all of this is realistically daily testing. But even daily testing is not that great, because remember, once you show symptoms, you still have risk of having a false negative. This means that the only real solution to testing for certain industries is daily testing plus better quality tests. That is, what we need is we need this less than 5% false negative on daily tests that can be done within, let's say, 5 to 15 minutes. That's realistically what we need. We don't have this yet. That's not good that we don't have this yet. But let's say that we do. Let's say we get to having daily testing, results within 5 to 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and false negative rates under 5%. And the way we try to protect is by testing daily. That's how we get around this problem, right? Daily testing for certain environments. So what I did, and you could probably guess what sector this all relates to. Obviously, this relates to the recovery stocks, retail, hospitality, travel industries, what we call the vaccine stocks. You know, the stocks we expect to do really well when we finally have a distributed vaccine and enough people are willing to take it. However, specifically of these recovery stocks, which stocks are likely to be hurt the most? Well, to be certain that we don't have COVID, we gotta test daily. And in order to test daily, there are two things that we need. Number one, we need low wait times, and we need a place to wait. So remember, even rapid tests can take anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes, sometimes even as long as 60 minutes. So I would expect, first, we need tests to be done in a place where people expect to be waiting anyway. That would be convenient. Factor number 2 to consider is cost. So before we start talking about the individual stocks, we've got to keep these two things in mind: wait times and cost. Somebody's going to have to bear the burden of these costs if we don't get to a vaccine soon and herd immunity. Which this cost, in my opinion, will likely be passed upon to the consumer in some way or another. Either more expensive ticket or product costs, or the company just ends up losing money, which ends up leading to either bankruptcy or higher costs for that company and higher prices, right? So either way, the consumer usually ends up paying for this. But let's go stock by stock, or sort of more individual sector by sector. Let's think airlines. Airports and airlines have waiting times. So this makes getting tested at an airport actually pretty easy. You could go into the airport, get tested, go get your ticket, and, by the time you get to the gate, you'll know your results. Hopefully, once we get those rapid tests, then you'll know if you're COVID-free that day, which is good, because if you're COVID-free that day, okay, you're probably COVID-free for the next 10 hours, which is a good thing. Airlines are very competitive, though, so it might be a little tough for them to pass this on to consumers in the form of higher ticket prices, unless, of course, they all did it. But then I'm sure you could always count on one airline to say, no $5 fee over here, we just won't test you. But either way, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the best rating for a sector, I would give airlines like a 6. If everybody's on an airplane and everybody's been tested, it gives people more comfort. I think there's plenty of waiting time to do it. And I don't know if they could add it to ticket prices. I think every dollar hurts on the airlines. But I think it would be worth it. So 6, maybe 7 for the airlines out of 10. Definitely primed to do it, more so than some other ones. What about movie theaters, restaurants, and malls? Well, on their own, movie theaters and restaurants, I think, are going to be a little bit more challenged to provide testing. People just aren't there that long, and the entry prices just aren't that high. However, combined with malls, I think restaurants and movie theaters could do better. For example, if malls were sort of the testing entry point, and then people could kind of wave around, I got tested today, and then they can go into stores and restaurants and the movie theaters, that would be good. Malls could be a really good sort of courier of testing, so to speak. However, the downside here is anyone can go to the mall and leave without buying anything, and this happens a lot, right? I mean, people go to malls just to get exercise in some hotter climates. This will probably be a cost worth it to get people back to a mall, though, but it's going to be expensive. I mean, look at the Sawgrass Mills Mall in Florida, one of the 5th busiest malls in the country. They had around 30 million visitors last year. That works out to about 82,000 guests a day, if we want to get back to prior levels. At even $5 a test, that's $410,000 a day, or about $12 million per month in tests. Somebody's going to have to pay for that. So when I think of malls, I get a little bit nervous for malls' capacity for really doing this. I do think malls would be the ones to do it over restaurants and movie theaters, but I'm going to put malls a little bit more at, I would say maybe like a 4.5 rating. It's kind of difficult. I'm not sure who's going to pay for it. They've got a lot of different entrances for malls. Outdoor malls, maybe not that big of an issue. But let's move now on into the specifics of outdoor dining, and then we'll get into some specific stock picks as well. Outdoor dining, generally deemed safe. In winter months, going inside is going to be a little bit more of a difficult sort of endeavor. And testing at the door, I mean, I personally wouldn't mind waiting 5 to 10 or even 15 minutes. But the problem is, I don't know if, restaurants are going to be able to support the costs for this. So I would say restaurants are probably even worse off than malls. So I'm going to put restaurants at a 3. They can't bear the cost. They've got the time, they've got the single point of entry, but the cost is going to be killer for restaurants. So that's where I'd rather see malls do it. And really the same here is going to be true of movie theaters, except it's even worse. At movie theaters, you have even a smaller likely ticket order than a restaurant. You get a meal at a restaurant and a drink and a family or whatever, you're gonna have more of a ticket there. Whereas at movie theaters, ticket prices, when people hear, what? A ticket already these days, $15, $18, what? And then add another $5 to it, it's gonna be tough to charge for this. And with movie theaters, it's already, we've already kind of got this cultural revolution where people are like, what? I'm more comfortable in my own home. I'm already paying for Netflix, and Disney Plus and all these other subscription services anyway, the Amazon Prime or whatever. I don't know. Out of the bunch, I give restaurants a better chance at a 3 than movie theaters. Movie theaters, I think, out of the things we're going to talk about, worst rating for testing. Really, I think movie theaters are waiting in full for the vaccine to really get back to normal here. And they're up against sort of this cultural revolution of actually getting people to think they have to go to movie theaters again to get that experience. It's almost like we've forgotten the movie theater experience. I'm not happy about that. And I've got a family in Germany that runs movie theaters, and so this makes me feel not very good or optimistic. So I think there's going to be a lot of creativity that has to come from movie theaters on this one. I do think testing would be a good idea. I just don't know who's going to pay for it. What about theme parks like Disney? Well, theme parks are unique. See, theme parks have high ticket prices, and in my opinion, a strong elasticity of demand. That means an extra $5, hike in the price of a movie ticket. That's gonna cut people out of going to the movies. That's very inelastic. On the other hand, at Disney, $5 on a ticket price of $150, $200, $300, depending on what you're doing or what you're getting, probably not that noticeable. And so my expectation is when people are going to Disney, they're expecting to spend money anyway. And so I don't think Disney passing on a $5 charge to their customers to test them would be that bad. If anything, I have a feeling that a lot of customers would be happy to pay that just to know that they're safe inside Disney for the day. Other theme parks obviously as well. Unfortunately, right now, Disney is doing testing for family members and employees, but the results still take 3 days to get at this point. So we still need that rapid same-day testing capability. And so this is really a future-looking video as to, okay, well, what do we see for the future of recovery stocks? Well, rapid testing, sure, that's great, but we still have a ways to go before we actually get there. Once we get to a state where we have rapid testing and we still don't have a vaccine, Disney, in my opinion, probably has a 10 for doing rapid testing. Think about it. You wait in line anyway to get your ticket scanned. You're usually outside in an open air environment before you go into the theme park. You got to go through security and testing and all that. There's plenty of room usually to wait, and you're waiting in security anyway. By the time you actually get to the turnstiles to get in, you probably already know the results based on rapid testing for Disney or any kind of theme park. And they're really tough to get into with the exception of these single points of entry, and I think people would be willing to pay for it. So in my opinion, theme parks are gonna rate in at about a 10 for picking a theme park style stock like Disney. Obviously Disney also has the cruise lines, and we'll talk about that. Also has the entertainment at home, of course, the merchandise, the movies and all that. But in my opinion, Disney, probably a good shot here at being a good recovery bet. And it has been, consistently. Disney's already been trending up. A lot of this optimism might already be priced into Disney. I always thought, in the 130s, Disney was starting to get a little rich. But out of the recovery stocks, I'd almost rather put money on Disney than some of the other recovery stocks. So I'm rating them at a 10, just based on right now. And, things can always change quickly in this crazy COVID world we're in. Now, cruise lines are a bit more risky. See, somebody could test negative, and even if they test every cruise ship customer before they board, based on this research, somebody could test negative with a false negative and then get on board, and then 2 or 3 days into the ship's excursion start developing symptoms. So it's kind of like silently carrying it onto the ship. Well, now you're stuck on a ship with a lot of other people. You do have, a lot of congregation happening on these cruise ships, a lot of tighter spaces. Not so good. Even if they somehow had daily testing, and even if somehow we were able to pay for all those tests on a cruise ship, it's going to change the experience, and cruise ships are going to have a little bit more of a challenge than like a theme park where you go home. You know, after you're done at the theme park, you look at the fireworks and you go back to the hotel or you leave. So to me, that puts cruise ships right there around malls of a 4, maybe even like slightly less, like a 3.5, which is worse than airlines. What about hotels? Well, the cool thing about hotels is hotels tend to be shorter term stays. They're less communal than cruise ships are. And the average hotel stay is only 1.8 days. So this isn't so terrible. You could really test somebody as they check in, probably be okay. The $5 I don't think will be too noticeable at hotels. So realistically, I think hotels are going to be closer to an 8. They're safer than the cramped spaces of airlines. They're more transient, more short-term. So I like hotels, and I like airlines better, but I certainly like theme parks the best out of all of this. Casinos are a little bit more tricky. Since casinos are so wide and dispersed and there's no real single point of entry, you've got elevators, restaurants, side doors, back doors, plenty of places for people to rob a casino and escape with money from. I don't know why that popped in my head, but it did. Perhaps, what they could do is they could require that if, hey, you go to Vegas, hey, did you get tested today? You know, when they check your ID because you sit down at a table or you want to start gambling or whatever, they check if you've been tested as well. But I think in actual casino testing is probably going to be a little bit more difficult. That puts casinos right around a 6, especially since casinos would probably be tempted to pick up the tab on that one. So as a result of this, and I'm not basing this entirely on this video, but I'm keeping this in mind. That's kind of how I look at stocks, is just constantly refining my belief in stocks and the investments that I'm making. Right now, many of you have seen the videos over the last few days that I've done about Dave & Buster's and Nikola and recovery stocks, and of course Tesla, Etsy, Peloton, Amazon, and Apple. I've been making a lot of videos on these in the stock playlist. And many of you already know that I sold a lot of my recovery holdings earlier this week. I would be tempted to slowly start trickling into some more of these with an adjusted recovery pie based on some of the thoughts in this video. And this really protects me if we go down that sort of more worst case scenario where we don't get a vaccine soon enough and all we can rely on is testing. Now, if we get a vaccine and people actually take it, well, I still think that's going to take a year. I think there'll be probably plenty of time to still jump on recovery stocks at that time, although I'm sure the day of a vaccine getting approved, we'll see some kind of jump in the recovery stocks. I do think that by reorganizing, we'll still be able to capture some or a good amount of that gain while also hedging ourselves on the downside a bit. So my POV, if you want to see exactly what the picks are, make sure you go to metkevin.com/recovery. Keep in mind that M1 Finance will actually give you $20 for free when you deposit $100 with them. And if you go to any of those links down below and you click on those pies, you can click on invest in this pie, you make an account. You don't actually have to invest in that pie, but by making an account through that link, you'll get $20 when you just deposit $100 with them. So there you have it. Thank you so much for watching this video. Check out those programs linked down below. And folks, we'll see you in the next one.